So for today's video, I thought I would answer a question that might be useful to more than one of you out there, that it is about how you go about world building, character building, and developing systems for certain characters. I think it's specifically relevant right now because, as you guys know, I have a game studio that I'm trying to build, and we actually go about it in a very specific way. And hopefully for all those that are willing and interested in starting your own game studios and in the future actually having your own business, creating games, maybe this might be useful to you too. So without further ado, let's get to it. Welcome to another video. I hope you guys had a wonderful week. The question that was actually presented by Yuri Montero, here, one of the subscribers of the channel, actually is very pertinent. And Yuri asks specifically, how do you go about world building and then specific characters and ecosystems? Would be interesting to hear more details about that in your future videos. I'm incredibly passionate about it because I have been building this studio for a good 2 years now, nearly 2 years now, and it's actually something fascinating to me. Even as a games developer where I was directing or doing things that actually involved creating something from nothing, even then, you're normally constricted to a specific place or a specific area that you can do things, right? So when I was a game director for Build a Rocket Boy, for example, they would actually tell me things such as, this character has these specific traits, here's some story, here's some notes, and then go off and design things and animation design things. For a studio and for a game that we're building from scratch, we have to do that with every single part of the game, right? So I have to actually think about where the design is going and where the animation is going and where the art is going and all these other things. And I have amazing people working with me, but what's true is they are all kind of like expecting for you to have some sense or some idea of what you ultimately want in the game, right? The game is not going to make itself, and somebody has to be that person to give that first step and tell them, I think you should go this route. And then obviously they can actually expand on the idea, make it better, making it amazing, because they are way better at doing what they do than me. But I need to be the person to say, this is more or less where I think we should go, and here's some sources, here's some information, here's some references, this is more information, writing, doodling, all these other things, so I can give them an idea. Now, ultimately, how do you go about building this world, building these characters, building this narrative, and also game mechanics to actually go on top of it? I can share my experience based on Proxima, even though I cannot say very many details because things are still secret, but I can tell you that, like, at the very least for us, we are actually basing our game on an existing IP, and it's a kick-ass IP that I'm incredibly passionate about, and it's a sci-fi IP. Now, for us, we are doing a space opera. We are doing something that actually has a lot of nitty-gritty. It feels very much like a spaghetti western meets space opera meets like lots of interesting characters. So there's a lot for us to pick up upon and build. And this is something that I specifically wanted because for me, building a game from scratch without having anything is incredibly difficult, because the whole idea of having nothing and then you having to come up with a narrative, you having to come up with characters, you having to come up with the world, wherever the game happens, it's a mammoth task. And most of the games that I've been, AAA games that are normally that way, what ends up happening is that there's a lot of unanswered questions by the time you hit development. And the problem is that you're developing and you're creating at the same time, and those two things a lot of the time don't go together. Pre-production exists for that, for you to have the ideas, for you to develop the story, the narrative, the characters, the worlds, and all that stuff. And then when you go into production, everything should be cemented. And we should be very much like, let's not touch this. This is what we have to work with. Let's do it. We can build on top of it, but this is basically the base of it. But a lot of the games that I worked in are not that way. So for us to have an IP, a source of content for us to actually take information off, is really, really satisfying and makes a development way easier, because we can always go back to the source material and be like, how did they do it in the source material? And then we'll go off and be like, okay, how can we interpret this into gameplay mechanics, into something interesting that the player can actually go ahead and do the thing, right? So we normally start with character. Character is essential for Proxima, is essential for what we're doing right now, and it's essential for us to tell the story that we actually want to tell. In our story, there is a main hero, main character, so everything revolves around this one character. But then there's also satellite characters that are incredibly powerful and help the main hero to tell the story. So for us, it's very much about how can we actually convey to the player with a controller in their hands that this guy is not only badass, but also you can connect with him, right? Personally. By the time you finish the story, just like when you play Zelda, you feel like this with Link, right? You feel like you guys are homies. Like, oh my God, we went through this together. That's basically what we want. Everything kind of like starts from there. That's the seed, and then everything starts to kind of like, spread out from that situation. Now we go into the satellite characters, how are they going to interact. This gives us a lot of design cues on how the player is going to interact with the game. What are the characters are going to do? What are they going to go? What kind of things is the player going to do to keep them entertained and going from point A to B to C to D as they go through. Our game is not necessarily a linear mission or a linear game, but we do want to make sure that the moment-to-moment aspects that engages the player and keeps them interested. There's also another layer on top that is all about how can we make these story beats non-repetitive. You all have played games that basically you do the same thing for hours on end in order to actually get to the end of the game. And the mechanics feels incredibly repetitive, and I feel like there's only so much you can take. And I'm not really saying about, what the player is doing. I'm just saying about how you use those mechanics for the fulfillment of the player. So for me, I'm a big fan of Nintendo, like most of you most likely are. And Nintendo, doesn't matter if it's a Mario game or if it's a Kirby game or if it's a Yoshi game, they normally set up what the character is going to do first. Mario Odyssey has a little hat that he throws, and he jumps around and he throws the hat, he can convert into the hat, he can put the hat on the thing, and the thing can transform into the thing, and it's great. So those mechanics need to be absolutely solid and really working well as a base, and then they build levels that cater to those mechanics. So those mechanics change ever so slightly, but not the core of the mechanics. The core of the mechanics are always the same, so the player knows exactly what to do, so the player is familiar with the mechanics. So this is where I think that spending time with your character, spending time creating the 3 C's, they call it, right? I've not made a video about this, go and check it out, I'll link it down below. But focusing on camera, character, control, those are the 3 C's. It's something that we have to actually do to actually create this dynamic that the character is interesting and you care for the character, right? I mean, everybody played Yoshi, everybody that played Kirby, you feel connected with the character after you finish the game, even though you've been doing most of the same things, but the adventure that Nintendo takes you through over the many levels that they put you through is incredibly satisfying. So by the time you finish, you're like, that's it, I don't get to do it anymore because I finished the game. Have to replay it again. But that is basically what we're trying to do with that main character. So then the peripheral characters actually come along and they have to actually complement anything that the character does. Now, without going into much detail, this involves a lot more work because normally you're not in control of those characters. Depends, right? Some games like God of War, for example, you have the kid, the Kratos kid. Sometimes you can control him, sometimes you can't. But either way, you have a tree that you can actually expand upon, you can give him extra traits, and you kind of semi-controlling what he does, or at least how he actually progresses through the game. So having characters that actually complement the main player are quite good depending on what you do with them, and this is something that we have to care about as well. And then ultimately is the world, right? Like once we actually sort out, at least for us, once we sort out those questions that I just mentioned before about how to actually empathize with the character, how to play with the character incredibly well, and how does it feel amazing, then how is this world interesting for the player, not only in looks, right, but also the things that you do in the planet itself, right? Like if the character is going to inhabit this planet, this level, this place, right, it cannot be just because he's pretty. And there's a lot of games that do that, as you guys might have known. It looks absolutely stunning, and then 5 minutes in, even though the art looks amazing, what you're doing as a player is not engaging, right? So it doesn't feel fulfilling enough. So this is why for me it's so big to actually focus on the 3Cs first, because that is ultimately what makes the player feel the game and be in contact with the game and have a form of interaction with the game, right? When you're controlling something, you're controlling the character. So that interaction between the player and the character is the most important thing. And then everything else is basically like expansion of that idea. So levels are also an expansion of that idea, because you traverse those levels, you have to do things in those levels, so they need to cater to the character and to the mechanics and to the story that you are going to tell. But they are incredibly important, because without levels there will be no game. So we need to make sure that the player does things that are interesting within those levels, that kind of like keep the moment to moment going, right? So going back to that idea of moment to moment, like, what does the player do that actually keeps them engaged to go from place to place? That normally happens in level and happens in the narrative sense of things in our case, because we're doing a single player narrative game, so you know it needs to actually matter a lot. So that is basically kind of how we think about it, from like the seed, which is the player, the main character, and then basically expanding till we get to the level and the planet or world or whatever you decide to actually kind of like host your game in. We actually see it as a line, or as like a dynamic between all these different pieces coming together, right? And if you do it well, and once again, because I've been doing this for about 20 years, games development, normally when it works, and it works well, it works incredibly well, meaning that like when you get it, every gamer, every person that has played a good game can get their hands on it and be like, just within first maybe 10 minutes, 20 minutes, be like, there's something special here. This is different. Imagine the first time that you played, you know, Spider-Man, right? The Insomniac Spider-Man that came out not long ago. When you start web slinging, when you start moving between the buildings and getting that sense of cadence and flow, it's really easy for you as a player to go like, wait a second, this game is special, right? And this is to do with the interaction that you have with Spider-Man and how good it feels and how fluent it feels in the animations and all these other things. So that is ultimately what we're trying to actually achieve with our game at Proxima, because if we actually get the player to actually feel that way within the first 10 to 15 minutes of the gameplay, even though they haven't seen very much, that's enough of a hook for people to actually stay and then see what happens to the character. And then on the second part of the equation, we just need to give them an incredibly strong narrative, an incredibly strong world to actually kind of like inhabit, for them to actually then go and explore and discover and go through the narrative. And then by the end, if we do our job well, we hope to actually get that player and character connected. Once again, naming Zelda all the time, but just like when you do with Link, and when you actually get that connection of like, you feel like you never want to finish this game, but at some point it's going to have to finish, and you can see that you're going to actually like feel very emotional, but it needs to happen because you want to see what happens in the end. You want to see that end. You want to see either positive or negative. You want to see the end, whatever it takes. And that's the magic of games, I think. So hopefully, Yuri, this answers your question a little bit more, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. And if you did, then drop a like, subscribe, and drop a comment and let me know about the games that made you feel this way that I'm talking about. I have a feeling that most of them are probably Japanese, because for me at least that's the case. There's numerous games that came out of Japan that rely on this idea that the mechanics between the player and the character and how you actually interact with that character is the most important thing before you actually explore the world. And that is the most important thing that I took from all these amazing games that I've played through the years. So that's it. That's all I had for you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And as always, thanks so much to my patrons for supporting me every single month. Highly appreciate it. And until the next video, stay safe, stay well. Peace.